You're tuned into Recovery TV, the voice of hope, with your host, John J. Tassoni Jr. Discussions and information on addiction and mental health issues. Here's your host, John J. Tassoni Jr., with today's guest.
Welcome to another edition of Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. Narcan, please get it. You can get it at the pharmacies, you can get it at URI. Please carry it, put it in your car, take it out of your car at night because the weather affects it. So today, folks, my guest is Dr. Brian Ackerman, and Mr. Ackerman is from AdCare, Rhode Island Counseling, and he has his own practice. Very, very busy guy. The reason being is that we don't have enough psychiatrists in the state of Rhode Island. So welcome, Doc.
Good to see you.
Thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure.
And I understand that you got a lot of material here. You wrote a book. You wrote a second book. What do we got?
I'm working on my third.
There you go.
So I've been on the staff of AdCare for about 10 years. And what interested me as a psychiatrist was the number of people that come back after they've been treated. They get
Come back as far as what?
They come back for recurrent treatment.
Okay, yep.
So they become sober, they're doing fine, and then boom.
It happens again.
Right. And when it happens again, they are not using substances to avoid withdrawal. So what occurred to me is that the model that we use, this has been standard for ages, of addiction being the driving mechanism of substance use, is a part truth and not the whole truth. And that there's another driving engine in it, which I located to self-injurious impulses. So what I've introduced to the substance world is that substance use not only is an addiction, but is also a self-injury disorder.
Interesting.
And as a psychiatrist, I became interested in trying to understand from the brain's perspective, because one of my specialties is I'm a brain educator, of how do we make sense of having the most advanced brain on the evolutionary market that nonetheless contains within it impulses to self-harm, which, if anything, are counter-evolutionary. There's no evolutionary benefit to self-harm. And with naloxone, we're talking about, likelihood of death.
Right.
So that's completely counter-evolutionary. So how do we make sense of it being in the most advanced brain evolution has ever created? The part of the brain that I traced it to is the amygdala, which is surprisingly small, and it's the size of a bottle cap buried deep within the brain. And it's called the fight or flight part of the brain. Everybody knows about anxiety, which is the flight part. The other part is a little trickier, which is the fight part. In all mammals prior to human beings, it's the side of aggression. And all aggression in mammals is directed outwardly to obtain food for survival or to ward off predators, again, for survival. Human beings also do that. But we do one other thing that no other species has ever done. We direct aggression against ourselves. First species ever. And again, we're looking at it in the context of how do we make sense of having the impulse to direct aggression against ourselves that no other species has ever had. And what's the evolutionary benefit of it? The way that I think about it, again, before we get to substance use, is that it's in every human being. Do you know a single person who doesn't go from time to time, how could I be so stupid? Which is mental aggression turned against the self. Again, no other species does that. When a lion chases a wildebeest and doesn't get it, and doesn't go off and sulk, it may rest to catch its breath, it'll just go after another one. But if a human being is in this similar predicament and doesn't get what it goes for, it feels lousy about itself.
Yeah, you're right.
And no other species does that. So what I looked at is that in our amygdala, we have an extra jalapeno pepper in it that backfires for us. And I look at the human amygdala affectionately as like having a Rhode Island pothole in our brain. And
Well, we got a lot of those, Doc.
well,
A lot of potholes.
This is just a very specific, very small area. And in the brain education mindfulness training that I do, I emphasize that we actually do have the most advanced brain on the evolutionary market, but it's not because of the amygdala, it's in spite of it. And the part of our brain that I like to direct people's attention to is the prefrontal cortex, which is behind the forehead, which has tripled in size our mammalian relatives, and allows human beings, the first species ever, to even be aware that it has a brain. Never mind, again, no other species, your dogs, your cats, the bunny rabbits in the grass, the deer out in the woods, they have brains that look like ours. They have no clue they have a brain. Nor would they be able to conceptualize what the purpose of the brain is, which is an abstract concept, which our brains are able, because of this specialized area, this added evolutionary advantage. We can understand that the brain has a purpose, and we can also understand an even more abstract concept that the purpose of the brain cannot be to self-harm. So that if it self-harms, it has a problem with it. Like the space shuttle where they said, Houston, we got a problem. Human beings, we got a problem, and it's located to a very small part of our brain. But the evolutionary genius of having a prefrontal cortex that's expanded allows us to be the first species ever to even be aware that it has a deficit that it can then course correct for it. So if you were a green toad in a green forest and the forest burned down so that it was brown, you would be exposed to danger, but you would have no clue as a frog what the problem was, nor a clue about what to do about it. If you were a human being in a similar predicament, you would say, oh my God, I lost my camouflage. I'm in deep dog doo-doo. I got to head out to Dick's Sporting Goods to get myself a brown hoodie and then go on to the next thing I got to solve today.
Right.
Case closed. So we have a part of our brain that's able to recognize what the problem is, what the true danger is, and also take steps on our own behalf to course correct for it, which allows us, the first species ever, to change part of our own heritage without having to have a mutation, which could take millions of years. Because people say, well, why can't we get rid of the amygdala? It's buried too deep in the brain to get rid of, but we can train ourselves to work around it and to more effectively use a much more constructive part of our brain.
So let me ask you just a few questions, because I just learned a lot.
Yes.
Young children, 10,
Right.
11, that particular portion of the brain, when does it get developed to a point where they know the difference?
There's two parts of it. It's generally thought that the most of this prefrontal cortex is not developed to the mid-20s, which is one of the reasons when, the toddlers are crawling around the ground and sticking their fingers in the electric socket.
Right.
They have to be supervised.
Right.
Because they don't have the capacity to be aware of danger and to realize danger and to act on their own behalf. So they need to be supervised.
Hang on one second, because I need to be supervised right now because I have to go to break.
Please.
You're watching Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. We'll be right back with Dr. Ackerman after these messages.
And now, back to Recovery TV with your host, John J. Tassoni Jr. Recovery TV is made possible by our supporting sponsors and our title sponsor, AdCare. Now, here's John and today's guest.
Welcome back to Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. Dr. Ackerman is in the house, and Dr. Ackerman is a psychiatrist in the great state of Rhode Island, who works with AdCare, Rhode Island Counseling, and he has his own practice. Doctor, thank you for coming on today.
My
I
pleasure.
greatly appreciate that. I want to go back to the first segment. We were talking about young kids.
Right.
And how the frontal lobe
Right.
works.
Yes, The prefrontal cortex, which is the most important part of the frontal lobe as far as of the brain in terms of behavior and decision making and well-being and choices, is not fully developed until the mid-20s. It's not even completely fully developed then. In fact, what we know now is it continues to develop throughout life. So if you want to hit a three-point shot the way Pritchard does, what you got to do is practice, 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 and we can train our brains to become more effective in doing what we need them to do, which is to manage another part of the impulsivity of a part of our brain, especially if a lot of that impulsivity is contrary to our best interest.
So let me ask you this question. What makes us go sideways when someone wants to take these substances? Is it something within the frontal lobe? Is it something within that little bottle cap?
Right.
What is it?
What I've been able to develop from this elucidation of the brain is that we have, effectively, it's a little bit like a hybrid car. It has two engines.
Okay.
One engine is gas, and it's more primitive, and it says go. And then there's a brake. And the brake is the prefrontal cortex. Now, it's interesting that evolution put the brake to come on to function later, and also require education and learning in order to work. But we absolutely have to learn to use a brake and develop the brake, otherwise the impulsivity runs the show.
Right.
So in a car that's hybrid, it's computer generated to choose which is the most efficient to go to. For human beings, we're training our capacity to be aware of our dual engines and the different directions that they take us, and manually select which engine we need to use. And the engine, of course, we want to use and can recognize we need to use is the prefrontal cortex as the driving, which is more of a brake. It's more thoughtful. It's more reflective, that it factors into its decision-making long-term consequences. Hence, it's on the side of evolution. It's looking after our long-term interest.
Now, I want to get to your books, because what made you write these books?
What got me interested in the book is that as I was interviewing people who use substances, they seemed like the part of their brain that they were identified with was the fight or flight part of the brain, as if that was truly them. And the concepts in the titles of the book, Me, Myself, and My Amygdala, is to make a distinction between a part that's in you and you, the true you. So if we have basically two minds within our brain, and one's a higher mind, higher capabilities, higher cognitive functions, higher emotions, more positive thinking, more constructive thinking. And we have a lower mind, which is more impulsive, more negative thinking, that acts as if it doesn't care about consequences. We can see we have sort of divided government. And
we have that too.
Yes, but this can help even explain that, because we have a division right within the brain, and everybody's got one of those.
You know, and I'm looking at the second book that you wrote, the one that just came out, Me, Myself, and My Temper, hits a nail right on the head, because people are so angry today.
Yes. So again, that part of the brain that gets angry is the amygdala. There's no other part. When you're furious, there's no other part of the brain that gets angry other than this bottle cap, which is, again, it's interesting to think when people say, I'm angry, I teach them in mindfulness training to say, the amygdala is angry.
Well, you know, you see everything that's going on in the world today. That bottle cap that you have in your hand is causing a lot of problems.
It does.
A lot of problems.
And the antidote to it is the capacity that we have that no other brain has. I'm aware I've got an amygdala. I don't know if I have it with me, I have a bumper sticker that says, honk gently if you're aware of your amygdala. Amygdala awareness is the key, but it's really a sneaky way of getting people to develop prefrontal cortex awareness.
So here's another question. So you have these groups that you
Right.
you run in AdCare.
Right.
Right. How do you get people who angry,
Yep.
they're using substances,
Yes.
along with using alcohol?
Yeah.
How do you get them to come to the middle of the road and get common ground that, okay, I need to stop doing this, and this?
Once people are introduced to this concept of self-harm, it's really an eye-opener. Because I treat people who don't use substances, who cut themselves and burn themselves.
Okay, yep.
And what I say to people with substance use, that the people who cut themselves and burn themselves, they're not addicted to the razor blade or the knife.
Right.
That those are the means to the hurting. And what if, just what if, you're not quite as addicted to these substances as you think, and you're actually trying to hurt yourself?
And that's becoming more prevalent day by day by day.
Also, but when people stop to think about it, do you really want to hurt yourself? The answer almost categorically is no.
No.
So now we got this tension. And I refer to it as a different version of what's called dual diagnosis, not spelled D-U-A-L, a psychiatric problem, and a substance problem, but D-U-E-L, as a battle between one part of your psyche and another
Right.
part, which I think is where the action is.
Yeah.
So I get people, and a great example is a gentleman who had, in 2024, 3 manic episodes, psychiatrically hospitalized, all of them substance-induced. When I introduced to him the concept of self-injury, and maybe he didn't even have psychiatric manic depressive illness, they had substance-induced bipolar, he stops his substances, and he's been substance-free for a year, and he's about to get married.
Wow. We're going to take another quick break.
Right.
You're watching Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni, with Dr. Ackerman. We'll be right back after these messages.
And now, back to Recovery TV with your host, John J. Tassoni Jr. Recovery TV is made possible by our supporting sponsors and our title sponsor, AdCare. Now, here's John and today's guest.
Welcome back to Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. Dr. Ackerman is in the house, and he works with AdCare, Rhode Island Counseling, and he has a private practice. Very, very interesting conversation today. I want to ask you a question because it's been posed to me a lot about psychiatrists. There's not enough in Rhode Island. There's not enough anywhere. What do you think the reason for that is?
I think economics is a sneaky factor in a lot of things, and the reward of the job would be, I think, 2 things. So I got interested in psychiatry because I'm interested in people.
I know you've been there 50
Right,
years
right.
doing this. I mean, seen a lot.
So it's always fascinated me. There's been a move because of the relative shortage of psychiatrists and the subspecialization for psychiatrists just to be prescribing meds.
Right.
And some meds are wonderful. But when people think that meds are the only answer, they miss the forest for the trees.
Right.
And I think our field took a kind of a wrong turn in sort of encouraging people just to become med prescribers.
Right.
I think it for those that have moved in that direction, the financial reward of that is great, but the effectiveness is not so great. Not so great. And the overall satisfaction of being there, sitting with people, and really helping people to get better. So in my private practice, I spend an hour with patients. I can't even bill for it because I don't have a psychiatrist spending an hour with people.
Well, Doc, I want to thank you for coming on, and I know your 2 books here. You can buy them on Amazon, the people that are watching today. Myself, My Temper, Myself, My Amygdala, and thank you so much for what you do. I greatly appreciate it.
I appreciate what you do as well, John.
And next week, folks, my person will be, Mike Manfredi will be on. See you next week. If you see something, say something.